Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My sincere thanks to Hazrat Allama Qari Zawar Bahadur for commencing our program in the best possible way. Also, I would like to extend my gratitude to Hazrat Allama Mufti Muhammad Shakir Misbai, the Imam of Masjid Usmani, who is present here today, the Imam of our mosque, Hazrat Allama Sayyid Sultan Shah, who is also present here. And to my left, I am very grateful to an old friend, colleague, work colleague of mine, Hazrat Allama Hafiz Gul Muhammad Al-Azhari, who today has journeyed from Nottinghamshire to be here at this event. Hafiz Gul Muhammad is an old colleague of mine. We studied together in Pakistan in Jamia Al-Karam and at Al-Azhar University, and at the moment, he, for the last decade in fact, has been the senior lecturer at Jamia Al-Karam. He is the ustad of the speaker that inshallah ta'ala you will be hearing soon in the form of Imam Asim Hussain. In this day and age, I think very easily people give the ulama the title of Ustad al-Ulama. But I think with Hafiz Gul Muhammad, certainly this is a befitting title for the amount of young scholars he is producing in this country. It's quite shocking and it's quite amazing, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable him to continue this good work. A great man, a person who has a great disposition, utmost humility, and the work that he is doing in Jamia Al-Karam and beyond, certainly it's something that we should all be proud of. So I am very grateful for him for coming today with his two sons as well. Today, inshallah ta'ala, what I would like to principally talking about before the main speech in the form of Imam Asim is the current crisis in the Middle East in the form of the Islamic State. Earlier this year, we found that Muslims in Palestine, they were on the receiving end of grave atrocities committed by the Israeli government. What we saw with our own eyes on the TV screens was that about 1,900 Palestinians were brutally killed by the Israelis, of which about 400 were children. And on the other hand, we found that only 66 Israelis lost their lives, of which only 2 were civilians. The rest of them were actually fighting military soldiers. The atrocities we saw went on in the month of Ramadan as well. And on the 30th of July, we heard the story how some Muslims, they took refuge in a United Nations school, which certainly should have been a refuge, a refuge where they knew that they would get some protection. The Israelis bombed this place as well, and 19 Muslims lost their lives. At the same time, not far away, Muslims in Iraq and in Syria, they too were victims of severe atrocities and severe killings. But this time, the perpetrators, the criminals, and the barbaric people behind these acts, they were not Israelis, but they were supposed Muslims. They were the Islamic State. And over the last year or so, and more intensely over the last few months, we have witnessed beheadings, crucifixions, stonings, rape, human slavery, massacres, burying victims alive, and religious cleansing. All, there seems to be no difference between a Muslim and between a non-Muslim. And as we speak, unfortunately, these atrocities are continuing. Perhaps worse still, and horrifically, we learned that approximately 500 British Muslims, they also journeyed from here to actually try to participate in this so-called jihad. So inshallah, the purpose behind this talk today is to look at the evil force behind this, the Islamic State. So in particular, my aim here today is to try to inform you of the root cause of this fitna, of this discord that is happening in front of us at this moment in time. My aim is not to dwell on the atrocities and the barbarity that they are committing. I'm not going to give you graphic images, for example, of what they have done. I don't see the point in that, and if you do need to know that, then you only need to open the newspaper, you only need to switch on the TV. So there is no point whatsoever in dwelling in that factor whatsoever. My aim today is to show you where this group has come from, what the background is, the historical context behind that, and how we can actually stop this fitna from this group from spreading and causing more trouble for the Muslims throughout the world. That is the aim of this talk. So in order to do that, I will perhaps throughout the talk have to take a step back and look at the historical context as well. So the talk inshallah ta'ala will last about 30 to 35 minutes. It is a very intense topic area. There's a lot of detail that I'm going to have to share with you, and even this detail I'm going to share with you has been summarized a lot. So in return, I would appreciate if you could have an attentive ear. It is heavy in places, but like with all of the study circles that we do, that there will be notes available on the Islamic Center website after, so at a slower pace you will be able to go through these as well. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل نعم المولى ونعم النكيل نعم الوكيل عليه توكلت وإليه متاب. So begin with then, what is the Islamic State? The Islamic State is an ultra-radical Islamic group that has right now seized large areas of eastern Syria and western Iraq. The leader of this group is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and his aim, he has made it quite clear that he intends to establish a caliphate not just in that region but throughout the Muslim world. Where does the history of this group come from? In simple terms, and inshallah over the program we will talk about this in more detail, that the history of this group on a short-term basis can be traced back to 2002. When the Americans invaded Iraq and when they had their presence there in that country, then this group, it went through a name change and it branded itself the Islamic State of Iraq, or for short i.s.i.s. More recently, when the Arab uprising happened in Syria and the surrounding areas, then it changed its name again and it called itself the Islamic State in Iraq and Sham. That is where we get i.s.i.s from. So the S at the end was representing Sham. And then more recently, in June this year, they saw that their mission, and perhaps this is a way of showing their intent, that they dropped the geographical part of it altogether, mentioning Iraq and Sham. And they just called themselves the Islamic State. So by doing that, they are trying to give us an indication that they see that their mission is truly global, and they are trying to reach each and every part of the world. For the purpose of this program, I'm going to refer to them as the Islamic State, but only for identification purposes. Otherwise, there is absolutely nothing Islamic about this group. If anything, I think the right name to call this group is the Satanic State. That is a more apt term to use, because in terms of aqidah, in terms of actions, in terms of wording, they have totally disowned the teachings of the mercy of all mankind, rahmatan lil alamin sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. They have nothing to do with him. If they resemble anyone from our past, the Islamic State, they resemble the Khawarijis, which existed at the beginning part of Islam, who were at war with the Shias. So that is the only resemblance I can draw, and many of our scholars draw, with how their actual past came about. To begin with though, and perhaps a large part of this program will be taking you back. I'm not going to talk about what is happening in 2014 so much, but I'm going to have to take you quite back to actually talk about the historical context of that. There's nothing wrong with this method. In the Quran itself, you will find that Allah time and time again, He tells us the story of previous communities, of previous ummahs. Why does He do this? Why does He tell us stories, for example, of what happened to the Qawm of Lut, what happened to the Qawm of Shu'aib, what happened to the Qawm of Salih alaykum wassalam? The purpose is you learn about them so you can take something. You can take some benefit from them. So what I'm going to do is give you that historical context kind of approach, something which the Quran sanctions as well, just so that we too can learn from where they have come from and where they are actually heading as well. In order to understand the current crisis of the Islamic State, it is imperative that you understand where this has come from. And today what I would like to do, and my thesis is that ISIS, or the Islamic State, it is the brainchild of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab Najdi, who lived 200 years ago. This is the beginning point of it. If you try to analyze the Islamic State from a recent past, maybe just going back a few years in Al-Qaeda, you will fail. If you try to analyze the appearance of the Islamic State because of 9/11, you will fail. You will only get a small picture of what is exactly going on. The only way you can appreciate what they have done, where they have come from and where they are going, is by taking you back 200 years ago to the time of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab Najdi. So let us start then and talk about very briefly who Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab was. Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab was born in 1703, and he was the founder of a creed that we know as Wahhabism today. He was born in an area called Najd, and in essence what he fought and what he believed is that he began to preach this idea that the mainstream Muslims, they had strayed away from Tawheed, and through their Sufism, through Tasawwuf, they had actually started committing shirk. Even in his youth, his extremism was spotted. His radical nature was spotted by his own father, by his own brother as well. To the extent that his own brother, he wrote a book in which he criticized directly the beliefs of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. This is the book here, As-Sawaiq al-Ilahiyya fi Radd al-Wahhabiyya. This book is written by the brother of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, Sulaiman bin Abdul Wahhab, in which he criticizes his creed. His father disowned him as well. In his early years, he did travel a lot, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. He went to Basra, he went to Baghdad, Damascus, he even went to India. And eventually he returned back to his homeland. In 1737, he began to preach his Puritan, you could say, form of Islam. And he began with his hometown. How did he do this? He did it through a book which he wrote, which he called Kitab al-Tawheed. The essence of Tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What was his aqidah and what was he trying to show? Number one, he blamed the bad state of the Sunni Ottomans at the time on the fact that they were too indulged now in tasawwuf. And they had turned away from the teachings of Tawheed. Number two, he condemned visiting shrines wholeheartedly. And he saw that as soon as a person visits a mizar, visits the resting place of any great person, even the Prophet ﷺ, then he has turned away from the teachings of Islam. He put a fatwa of kufr on such people. He also suggested that there should be no respect whatsoever for the dead. Absolutely none whatsoever. When it came to visiting shrines, he also directly said that there is absolutely no purpose in you visiting Medina Sharif. He told the Hajis that when you go on Hajj, then go to Mecca Sharif, perform the pilgrimage, and then return home. There is no purpose in visiting the final place of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In order to show the ordinary nature of our Prophet alayhi salatu wa sallam, he discouraged people from sending salawat upon him. He didn't like this. And as we go on, we will talk about this in more detail. Instead, what did he give preference to? He gave preference to the ritual. Salah, salah, salah. That perform salah, if you don't perform salah, then you become a kafir. So he gave the ritual utmost importance, the spiritual, he had no time for whatsoever. Even the madhab system, which had been successful and is still successful today for the last 1,000 years, he totally disowned it. Today, yes, I know that the Wahhabis, they say that we belong to the Hanbali mazhab. But that is in name only. It is only to win some kind of credibility. Otherwise, in reality, the Wahhabis, they are la mazhab. They don't follow a particular school of thought. Very importantly, whenever people did accept his version of Islam, the first thing he did to such individuals, he said, read the kalima again. When people asked, why are you asking us to recite the kalima again? He said, because you were a kafir before. You were a mushrik. Recite the kalima again. When people came who were married, he would ask them to recite the kalima sharif and say, I'm going to read your nikah again. They would ask, why are you going to read our nikah again? They would say, because you done nikah in the state of kufr. This is very important. It's because that up until that point, this whole idea of takfir, it was taken very seriously. It is remember the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he warned us about calling other people kafir without any evidence whatsoever. And you know very well what that warning was, that if you accuse someone of kufr, and he himself is not a kafir, then what happens? It returns upon you. He broke that tradition, and he began calling people kafirs when they accepted his version. Then they said, now, only now, that you have become a Muslim. If people did not accept his version, what did they do? Then in his own belief and actions later, what did he do? He said, it is permissible for me to kill such people. It is permissible for me to violate their women. It is permissible for me to confiscate their property as well. How this manifested itself, you will see, inshallah ta'ala, very later. In 1744, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab was trying his utmost hardest to try to preach his version of Islam upon the locals in his area. He had no success whatsoever, and in fact they kicked him out of the village. When he was kicked out, he took refuge in a place nearby called Daria. There he met a local rebel called Muhammad ibn Saud. Muhammad ibn Saud was a local rebel. He had nothing to do with Islam. He was not a religious person. Rather, he was interested in politics, he was interested in money. They struck up a very close relationship, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab on the one hand and Muhammad ibn Saud. What they decided is that they realized that, look, if we work together, then we can dominate this area and we can dominate the whole Saudi peninsula. How would that actually work? They made it simple. What they said is that Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab said, I will be the religious authority. Muhammad bin Ibn Saud, you will be the political authority. I will provide the fatwa, you will provide the ammunition. When we work together, then slowly we can take over the Saudi peninsula. They were very close together, and like they used to do a lot in that time, they cemented their relationship through marriage. And they made another pact as well. They said, within one another, they said that from now on, whoever is the political leader, then from our children, that leadership has to stay in our family. Whoever is the religious authority, then that has to be passed on through our family as well. Who was the political authority? Ibn Saud. Who was the religious authority? Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. Since that day until this time now, the political authority in Saudi Arabia has stayed in the family of Ibn Saud. Since that day, the minister of religion in Saudi Arabia has belonged to the Al-Sheikh family. And the Al-Sheikh family traces back directly to Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. They made this pact over 200 years ago. It is still being practiced today. Every single minister of religion belongs to the Al-Sheikh family, who belongs to the family of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. Bit by bit, they began to conquer the Arab Peninsula. And by 1788, they controlled most of the region. How did they do this? Brute force, violence, bloodshed. You are a Sunni, you go to the Mizar, you are a Kafir, we are allowed to kill you. We take your women, we take your property as well. And moreover, they gave it a term jihad as well. They said that, look, what we're doing is not brutality and it is not bloodshed needlessly, rather this is jihad in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Soon their power grew and grew. By 1800, they had control of most of the Saudi peninsula. And now they began looking outside the peninsula. In 1801, and between 1801 and 1802, they attacked Karbala. Immediately, the first thing they did is that they demolished the shrine on top of Imam Hussain radiallahu ta'ala anhu, final resting place. For thousands of years, there had been treasure actually there in the shrine, in the mizar of Sayyidina Imam Hussain radiallahu ta'ala anhu. They took that and they saw that as booty, as mali ghanimat. They looted the place. A couple of years later, they went to Taif, the next year in fact. Again, they ransacked that place. The streets were full of blood. And then in 1806, between 1806 and 1811, they took over Mecca and Medina. Not for the first time, but, sorry, for the first time, they tried to destroy the final resting place of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They wanted to destroy the Gumbad Khadra. They were unsuccessful in that. However, what they did do is that in the Hujarat of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, there were some precious belongings, there were some old tabarrukats, there were some old gifts that had been given to the dignitaries. They looted all of that and they discarded what they did not want. But you could say that they totally looted the city, totally. This was happening in the Saudi Peninsula, but unfortunately I'm going to take you to another episode which was happening in the wider world, which is just as important. So far I have only told you what is happening in the Saudi Peninsula. But at the same time, there was another force which was taking over the world, British colonialism. You cannot ignore what was happening in order to understand the Wahhabi story. At the time, the British had taken over India and they wanted to control Kuwait. Why did they want to control Kuwait? Because they saw it as an important port in order to establish a trade route from Europe to the Far East as well. So they needed it. geographically, diplomatically as well. They needed this area in order to control their forces and in order to control their businesses in India as well. This happened in 1755, the first attack. In 1755, the British tried to attack Kuwait. They were unsuccessful. Who was in Kuwait at the time? The Sunni Ottomans, our people. They managed to stop the British from actually attacking that place. Remember, this is happening in the time of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. 20 years later, in 1775, again the British tried to attack Kuwait. Again, they struggled to do that. But this time, what happened was that by this time, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab and Ibn Saud's partnership, that was much stronger. So in and about 1787, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab himself, he declared himself as the leader of the entire Ummah. And as he did so, he described the Ottomans as being mushriks. Our Sunnis, basically. That you are idol worshippers, you are shrine worshippers. So what did he say then? That to wage jihad against them is permissible for us. It is jaiz for us. At that time, the British wanted control over the Kuwait. What did Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab and the Wahhabi movement do? They actually helped the British, the non-Muslim British, to overcome the Sunnis in Kuwait. Rather than siding with the Ottomans, the Wahhabis actually helped the British, and the British, they became the colonial power there. So you see the mindset of the Wahhabi movement, that when it comes to fighting the Muslims, they will side with the non-Muslims. They will side with the British as well. So many observers, a lot of people, they say that, look, when it comes to British interest and how close Britain is with Saudi Arabia, they automatically think to themselves that this is because of oil. This is a recent phenomenon. This shows that the British and the Saudi relationship is much more older than that. It goes back a long time as well. Eventually, the Ottomans, inspired by the Sufis, in particular the Naqshbandis, they reacted, they succeeded, and they toppled the Wahhabism in the Saudi Peninsula. They overcame them, they reclaimed Mecca, and they reclaimed Medina Sharif as well. So this was in and about 1818. For the next 80 or 90 years, between 1818 and the beginning of the 20th century, what you will find is that academically, there was a surge in anti-Wahhabi literature. In Egypt, in the Saudi Peninsula, and in India as well. So what you will find is that Ala Hazrat Fazl Barelvi Rahmatullahi alayh, he is one example of the anti-Wahhabi movement. This is where it actually came about from. I'm not going to, unfortunately, we don't have time to go through the whole story, but I'm going to jump a bit now. Now I'm going to talk to you about the revival of Wahhabism in the 20th century, and where it actually came about. Like I said earlier, the Ottomans, they reclaimed power from the Wahhabis in the Saudi Peninsula, but at the beginning of the 20th century, the Ottomans themselves, they had trouble. The First World War was about to begin. So financially, they were weakened as well. Muhammad bin Abdul Aziz in Saudi Arabia, he took advantage of this situation. He was from the children of Ibn Saud, and he became the king in Saudi Arabia. He started the second revival of Wahhabism. He took over the Saudi Peninsula, and when he did so, second time round now, he said, we're going to do something different from what our predecessors have done. This time we are going to cement power, and we're going to make sure that the Saudis stay the rulers this time. What did he do? Number one, like before, he decided that it would make sense to team up with the Wahhabi Aqidah. In terms of the background to it, in terms of the support for it, it makes sense to team up with them as well. Just like his forefathers, what did he do? He used marriage to strengthen his relationship with Wahhabism. And he did this by marrying the daughter of Sheikh Abdullah ibn Latif, who was the chief Wahhabi scholar of the time. So now then, he was the king of the Saudi Peninsula. He needed that support to manifest itself throughout the whole region. So what did he do then? Then he started to get the Bedouins to support him. The Bedouins are basically those Muslims who lived in the rural areas. The villages, you could say. The Arab, what we call it in Arabic. He needed to actually get their support as well. In order to do that, what did he do? he decided that first and foremost, we are going to promote this idea of jihad. Anyone who does not side with the king for fighting jihad against them is permissible now. Financially, he began to support the Arab in the rural areas. So from 1912 onwards, the king, what did he do? He started organizing different projects, different development projects, and basically bribed a lot of these tribal leaders to actually support him. The king essentially was sitting there, he was sending money, he was sending forces, he was sending sanitation and housing projects just to help these Arab in the rural areas of the Saudi Peninsula. In return, what did he want? He wanted the support of them, as much as possible. Also, what he also done, remember this is the political support, he also supported them religiously as well by sending what we call mutawwas. Mutawwas are the religious police. These were sent to each and every area of the Saudi Peninsula. The Bedouins, what did they do? They formed an organization called the Ikhwan. This is not to be confused with Ikhwan al-Muslimin, which existed in Egypt. This is just the Ikhwan. So the Bedouins themselves, they formed a group. They called it the Ikhwans. They were strong. They were reliable. They saluted the king. They supported them. The king, in return, he supported them lavishly and gave them lots of money. The relationship was a brilliant one. They saluted the king and they had their pictures everywhere, and in return the king knew that at a click of a finger, these people will fight in my cause. Over time, however, the Ikhwan, they grew and grew in confidence. They became very arrogant. They considered themselves as the true custodians of the state and morality. And as their power grew in the rural areas, they started abusing their power. What did they start doing? They started taking Wahhabism itself to its literal reading. The king himself was becoming very modern. He was driving around in Rolls Royces now. He was spending lavishly on himself. But the Ikhwan in the villages, they were very primitive, and they took a literal reading, thanks to the mutawwas, of what Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab actually taught. So, for example, they would severely punish anyone who would be caught not reading Salah in the mosque. Anyone caught smoking, punish him. Anyone caught singing, punish him. Anyone shaving their beard, punish him and the barber as well. They began giving a very, very hardcore extremist version of Islam. Abdul Aziz, he noticed this. He noticed that bit by bit, these Ikhwan, who he actually supported and who he had brought up, they were becoming more and more arrogant. They found that they were making decisions themselves based on Sharia without actually consenting the king. They began questioning the policies of the king as well. And they now were actually objecting things like telephones, cars, bicycles, even clocks, this modernity. So there was friction now between the king on the one hand and the Ikhwan on the other. Very importantly, the Ikhwan, they did not know that this was the boundary of Saudi Arabia. They didn't believe in boundaries. They thought that, look, if we are Islam and this is the Islamic Caliphate, then what is this purpose of this red line on the map? So when it came to showing their power, when it came to actually showing how brutal they were, they extended beyond Saudi Arabia. So they were waging war in southern Iraq, in Jordan, and importantly in Kuwait as well. Who was controlling Kuwait at that time? The British. As you can imagine, the ambassador and the British, they phoned up the king in Saudi Arabia and they said, what's going on here? Your own people are attacking our area. The king, he had to react to this. He had to keep the British happy as well. He did not want the British to be upset with him. So eventually what the king realized is that I have to try to control these Bedouins who are my people, but it seems they are spiraling out of control. How did he do this? Number one, through his Wahhabi scholars. His central Wahhabi scholars, they started sending fatwa against the Ikhwan and what they were doing. They said, number one, allegiance to the king is utmost priority. Why are you insulting the king now? Why are you not consulting him in these decisions? Why are you making Sharia decisions without telling us? So they said now, these central Wahhabi scholars, the chamche you could say of the king, they said from now on, only we are going to offer fatwas. You Bedouins, you Arabis can't make any fatwa anymore. Number two, the scholar said, You are committing backbiting, and backbiting is haram. You Ikhwans, you are talking negatively against the king. This is like eating the flesh of your dead brother. Do not commit a sin by doing this. Number 3, they said that don't forget one thing, that the king was trying to tell these Bedouins that you people were ignorant. You people were primitive. You people were just villagers and farmers. We are the one who gave you prosperity. We are the one who gave you this housing, these sanitation projects. We are the one who paid you. Don't forget your roots. As you can imagine, not on religious grounds, purely on power grounds, purely on control grounds, purely on ego grounds, tensions began between King Abdul Aziz on the one hand and the Ikhwan movement on the other. How did this actually manifest itself? There was an internal civil war when the King Abdul Aziz, he fought against his own people, his own children, you could say. The own people he had supported. And this manifested itself in Seville in Saudi Arabia in 1929, where the king, he crushed the revolt. Guess who we used in order to help him crush the Ikhwan? The British. He used the British as well to actually do that. Moving on very quickly, what does this episode show? Number 1, Wahhabism really is just a political sect. It doesn't have any religious basis to it. They used religion, like Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab before him, to control people and to gain power as well. Number 2, frictions and arguments between the old version of Wahhabism and new version has always existed. Look, the king, he was a Wahhabi himself. The Ikhwanis, they were Wahhabis as well. The king loved Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. The Ikhwan loved Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. The only difference is that the king, he loved his luxury, he loved his cars, and he loved the beautiful flats. He loved the telephone. He loved the luxury. He was becoming Western. The Ikhwan, on the other hand, they were a bit more primitive. They say, no, 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 we want it to be as simple as possible. And number 3, like Abdul Wahhab before him, the Saudis never hesitated to forge alliances with the West. This is the most important part. That's the end of the historical context. And now we're going to come to the thing. Ever since then, Wahhabism has been caught in this pattern. The appearance of new versions that are more and more radical than the past. The original movement finished with the death of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab at the end of the 19th century. The Ikhwan was the first group to revolt against Wahhabism, which is Wahhabism itself. Ever since then, what you find now, and I will give you 5 examples of groups that have existed since, all you will find now is that it's Neo-Wahhabism, Neo-Salafism, a new reaction. They are not reacting against you and I, they are reacting against Salafism in reality. So with 5, 6 examples, I will show you how, since the 20th century, all that has happened, these Islamic groups, these terrorist groups, these ultra-radical groups, what they are really doing is they are reacting against the original Wahhabi movement. And I will share a few examples to show that. Number 1, perhaps the most important one. In the mid-60s, some of the descendants of the Ikhwan movement, they emerged and they formed a group in Saudi Arabia called Al-Jama'ah As-Salafiyya Al-Muhtasiba. Who was the leader of this? Sheikh bin Baz, a very famous scholar. He was the chief mufti of Saudi Arabia. A very respectable scholar in the Saudi peninsula. What did they want, this movement here? They opposed modernity. And their rallying call is that we want a return to the pure Wahhabism. What did they do then? Some of their tactics? Number 1, what they did is that in the 60s in particular, they were totally against pictures and photographs. At that time, you can imagine that the aviation industry was taking off. And we had the development of passports. They were totally against people having their pictures being taken in passports. They absolutely hated that. In the streets of Mecca and Medina, they began a campaign whereas if there was any picture or any photograph, a group of youngsters who belonged to this group, JSM, they would tear it down. They say, how dare you, this is against the teachings of classical Islam. One particular event that happened in Medina Sharif was that there was a shop window where there was a female mannequin. What some youngsters did is that they smashed the window down and they tore everything apart in that shop. They were arrested by the police, the Saudi police. They were put in prison for a week. rather than muting this, what happened is that support for this group actually began spreading in and around the area. People were supporting this act. People were actually sympathizing with what these youth had actually done. And soon what you find is that this group, JSM, they had support in Mecca, in Medina, in Riyadh, in Jeddah, in Taif, in Dammam. All of them were youngsters. All of them deliberately did not take up government posts. They said, we don't want anything to do with the government. They did not take any civil service post whatsoever. Who was the inspiration? Sheikh Nasiruddin Albani. Again, a Salafi Wahhabi scholar. He used to come to their lectures quite often, and he used to preach the message to them as well. And to give that kind of twist to it, of individualism, being unique. Remember, Albani himself was la mazhab, he didn't believe in the mazhab system. He started teaching them different ways of performing salah. And the only purpose was behind that was not because he had discovered a new way of performing salah, or he had found something that all our scholars for the last 1,400 years hadn't found. It was just basically to differentiate us from the others. What would they used to do? They used to come to the haram, and even in the homes and the mosque, they used to perform salah with their shoes on. They used to say this is permissible. Even to this day, a lot of the Salafis, they actually believe that is part of that. One of the members of this group, JSM, Al-Jamaat Salafiyya Al-Mu'tasibah, I'd like to talk about in more detail, and this is the second case study that I would like to share with you. Juhayman al-Utaybi. He was perhaps the most serious offshoot of Wahhabism, which was seen by the entire world in Mecca in 1979. Juhayman was venting his frustration against the Saudi state for being corrupt, for being too Western, for being too wasteful. Even before 1979, he was arrested and he was put in prison by the authority. He was seen as extreme by then. Whilst he was in prison, he met an individual called Muhammad Abdullah Qahtani. Muhammad Abdullah Qahtani, he told Juhayman, he said that I have seen a dream, and in that dream I have been informed by Allah that I am the Mahdi. He said so that it is my mission to actually save the world because the end of time is coming. Juhayman believed him. And so when they eventually were released from prison, Qahtani on the one hand and Juhayman on the other, they started planning to actually prepare for the end of the world. They drew support from many rich Saudi individuals who helped them financially. Many of the Saudi academics supported them. Many of the representatives in the army were also sympathetic to Juhayman and his people. And what happened was that prior to 1979, in November, months before and weeks before, they managed to stock ammunition, guns, gas masks into the sacred mosque in Mecca. What did they do? You know the coffins that come for Salatul Janazah? They hid them in there. And you know the custodians of the mosque, they paid them off. Many of them were sympathetic to Juhayman anyway. They were ultra-Wahhabis just like them. So just before that, in 1979, they managed to stock up the Kaaba Sharif with guns, with grenades, with gas masks. On the 20th of November, 1979, they stormed the mosque. About 100 of them. As soon as they got in, they locked all of the gates. Most of the Muslims, people were performing Tawaf at the time. Fajr Namaz was going on. Okay. They went to the Imam and they hit him and they moved him out to the side, and Juhayman himself got the microphone and told all of his people to stand on the minarets and so forth, to be prepared for that. They released most of the Hajis, but some of them they did keep. Saudi police, how did they react? Well, at first they thought little of this. They said it's a madman in the haram, we'll get rid of them. So they sent their police to actually gun them down. They themselves were gunned down. They were just picked off from the tall minarets by Juhayman and his men, and one by one they were killed. They now realized that the situation was quite serious. Then they started involving foreign forces. One rumor has it that the French were involved in order to oust Juhayman from inside the haram. Most academics and most observers say that it was Pakistani army who was sent to try to oust these terrorists from the Haram Sharif. Nevertheless, the siege, it went on for about 2 weeks. When it eventually ended, 255 Hajis were killed, troops and insurgents, 560 were injured, and there was 127 military casualties, all inside the Haram Park. All inside the place where you and I have performed the Umrah. all inside the month of Muharram, which is a sacred month. This is what happens when you take Wahhabism to its extreme. Juhayman, he was caught, him and 67 others, they were tried secretly and publicly, they were beheaded. Importantly, who was his teacher? Bin Baz. He was a source behind it, and who went on to become the Grand Sheikh of Saudi Arabia. Months before this attack happened, Qahtani was in prison. The Mahdi, the supposed Mahdi anyway, he was in prison. He was released. How was he released? A phone call. Bin Baz phoned the police and said, please, there's a man called Qahtani in prison, can you release him please? On the request of Bin Baz personally, because he was his teacher. He was a teacher. They had Qahtani released, and this is how the attack actually happened. Now, when it came to the actual attack, when it came to the actual siege, the Saudi police wanted to know whether it was permissible or not to use the gun inside the Haram Sharif. They wanted ijazat, because they permission. So they rang the Grand Sheikh at the time. Now let's find out if we were allowed to use force inside the Haram Sharif. Who picked up the phone on the other side? Bin Baz. He picked up the phone. Bin Baz, Sheikh Saab, is it permissible to kill people in the Haram? Bin Baz knew it was his own students doing this. Reluctantly, he gave them permission. Bin Baz, otherwise, when you go to the shrine, he will put a kufr fatwa on you. He will say you are a mushrik. Afterwards, did Bin Baz put a fatwa of kufr on Juhayman and the likes? No, he didn't. He said they are an armed group, they have strayed, but they are still Muslims. Why? Because he was the product. He actually made these people. He was the actual person who actually inspired them, as you could say. You can imagine that Juhayman, his writings, his work, and his, you could say, his almost martyr status, it has inspired Al-Qaeda, it has inspired Islamic State more recently as well. More recently, Sahwa, this formed in the 1990s. This is the third example of ultra-radical groups which have emerged since the original Wahhabi movement. This emerged in the 90s, and it was made up of imams, clerics, who had led protests against the way the king had sided with the West. Remember, this happened after the Iraq war against Kuwait. In July 1992, 108 senior clerics and imams, they signed a memorandum to the Saudi state, and they said, we want a return to the original Wahhabism. That is our demand for it. This was the intellectual basis and background for Al-Qaeda and for ISIS thereafter. Then we come to Al-Qaeda. When was this formed? This was formed in the late 1980s, at the time when the Afghans, they were fighting against the invasion from the from Soviet Union. It was led, as you know very well, by Osama bin Laden. In February 1989, as the atrocities in Afghanistan were finishing, Osama bin Laden, he came back to Saudi Arabia. Only a year later, in 1990, in August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Now when they invaded Kuwait, Saudi, they began shaking. And they thought to themselves that they had invaded Kuwait with all of those precious oil fields. The chances are that Saddam Hussein might actually invade Saudi Arabia now. Immediately, and remember Osama bin Laden, he was almost royalty in Saudi Arabia. His father was a very known figure who had a construction company who had built both Haramain. He was well respected in Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden directly spoke to King Fahd and said, please, you know my background. I have managed to fend off the Soviets from Afghanistan with the help of my Mujahideen. Please let me protect Saudi Arabia through my men, the Mujahideen. We can protect this land, and we can ensure that Saddam Hussein does not put a single foot inside Saudi Arabia. King Fahd listened and he refused. What did he do instead? He enrolled the help of the United States and the British government. He didn't want Islamic support like his predecessors, like what happened in Kuwait. Rather, he wanted British support. As you can imagine, Osama bin Laden was enraged. He was furious that the king had allowed non-Muslims to occupy the sacred lands. So what did he do? He vented his anger very publicly. And as a result of that, he was banished and he was forced to seek refuge outside Saudi Arabia. He was forced out of the country. Even when he was forced out of the country, the Saudi authority, they chased him and said, give back your Saudi passport because you no longer have the right to this. But his family, the Bin Laden family, who were billionaires, they said to him, please stop the $7 million a year you are giving to him as pocket money. Which is exactly what it was. They were a very rich family. The family, they were forced to stop that. Thereafter, where did Osama bin Laden get his financial support from? Rich private individuals, mostly from Saudi Arabia itself. In 1998, Osama bin Laden and you could say the academic leader of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, they offered a fatwa and they said that they called upon all Muslims and said that you have to basically kill all Americans and all of their allies wherever you can, however you can. A general fatwa against the West. This was in 1998. And then thereafter, you know very well, I'm not going to dwell on it, that there were many terrorist attacks that took place throughout the world, mainly against the West, mainly against the American forces. 1993, that there was a car bomb that tried to destroy the World Trade Center. In 1998, many American embassies were bombed in East Africa, over 300 deaths. And of course, we know very well that the attacks of 9/11 and the attacks of 7/7 have also been blamed on Al-Qaeda. What is Al-Qaeda? It's a reaction to Wahhabism, which itself is quite radical itself. Now we come to ISIS. What is ISIS? It's a splinter group. It's just basically the next chapter of the story which has started in the time of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. It's the 5th chapter, you could say. It's a splinter group. Basically, it is a splinter group. And like Wahhabism in the past, it has come about because of power, because of frustration, that the way that Saudis have actually done this with the, sided with the Westerners. How did ISIS come about then? It's basically a splinter group. Otherwise, what you could say is that the actual basis of it was formed in the early 2000s in a group called Jama'at al-Tawheed wal-Jihad. At that time, the leader was Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, and he sided with Osama bin Laden. Like many of the groups before him, they were against Western involvement in the area as well. Then in 2003 and 2004, Iraq was invaded by the USA and Saddam was toppled. And so now there was trouble and there was US involvement directly in Iraq. It was at this time that they changed their name. They changed their name to Tanjim al-Qaeda al-Jihad fi Bilad al-Rafidain, or for short Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They became very brutal, they were very violent in their manners as well. Zarqawi was killed in 2006, but his mission lived on when a new group was formed, and this was called the Islamic State of Iraq, i.s.i.s. And then in 2006, this also went through a change as well. The early days for this group, the Islamic State in Iraq, were very, very difficult. Because at that time, the Americans were using their heads. They were forming alliances with the locals in Iraq. They were finding the real Sunnis and saying, look, fight these Wahhabis. So in that sense, they were quite successful. So it was very, very difficult for AQI to actually gain a foothold in that area. But then what happened? The Arab Spring came along. And that caused a civil war in Syria. And it caused a lot of trouble in and around that region as well. So what happened then is that now the i.s.i., led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, it was finding support not just in Iraq, but it was finding support in Syria as well. Al-Qaeda's presence in Iraq was called Al-Nusra. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi went to Al-Nusra and said, look, I will give you my men, I will give you my support as well. What did Al-Qaeda say in Iraq? They said, we don't want you. Why don't you want it? Why don't you want to support? We're against the Westerners, you're against the Westerners. What did it boil down to? Credit. Al-Qaeda wanted the credit of what was going on in that particular region. They didn't want They didn't want ISIS to actually take credit for that. And that is the reason why there is an ikhtilaf between Al-Qaeda itself and between the Islamic State themselves as well. The United States, they began to withdraw from this area. Unfortunately, that meant that the Islamic State there, they became stronger and stronger and stronger. To conclude now, a couple of points that I would like to finish with. Number one, we see now that the Islamic State is very, very strong. How has it actually got to that point? Money. As simple as that. They are being heavily funded by the Gulf states. Publicly and officially, no one will admit to actually supporting ISIS or the Islamic State. Privately, there are many charities, there are many illegal ways by which the Islamic State is getting money. Where is that money coming from? It is coming from Saudi Arabia, it is coming from Qatar, it is coming from Kuwait. In June this year, the Islamic State, they attacked Mosul in Iraq. When they did so, they absolutely looted the place. They raped the women, they beheaded people, they performed total massacre. The one thing they also did is they went to the central bank in Mosul. They absolutely looted them. How much money did they get away with? $425 million. That is what the Islamic State took that day. And since then, the observers have said that the Islamic State, they are the richest terrorist group in the world. They themselves say that we have got $2 billion worth of funds. And what are they doing with this money? They are paying mercenaries. They pay them $100 a day. They're not fighting because they think it's jihad. They're not fighting because they believe in the religious cause. They're fighting because of the dollars. They're paying the mercenaries there $100 a day to actually fight them as well. In fact, so much so that observers have said that the Islamic State is richer than many Colombian drug cartels that exist. That is how rich they are. So if you want to get rid of this fitna, you have to cut off their money as well. The second reason why they are allowed to flourish is because there are too many sympathizers. Too many people are actually sympathetic to the Islamic State. In Saudi Arabia in particular. Number one, they are happy. What is happening in Iraq and what is happening in Syria, they are leveling all the shrines to the ground. Saudi Arabia is happy with this. They want to do the same with Medina Sharif. And you have seen that over the last fortnight. Number two, they are happy to see Islamic State kill the Shias in Iraq and in Syria. The Wahhabis absolutely detest Shias. This goes back 200 years, so they're happy with that. Number three, a lot of the Saudi sympathizers, they also, like these extremist groups, they hate the hypocrisy of the Saudi king. That on the one hand, you are saying that you are totally Islamic, yet on the other hand, you are in bed with the Americans. So this is part of the problem, and this is why they have been allowed to flourish. With all of these groups I have mentioned, the Al-Jama'ah Salafiyya Al-Muhtasiba, the Al-Sahwa, Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, why, in my eye, do you think I am actually saying and attributing the problem to Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab? They all have the same ideology, the same mindset, and the same policy. In every single sense. All of them, number one, use takfir as a way of justifying violence. Takfir basically means that you are a kafir. Once you are a kafir, I am allowed to fight jihad against you. Who started this tactic? Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. All of them use inhumane violence. And you have seen that. They do not differentiate between Muslims and non-Muslims. You will see that Juhayman himself, he killed Hajis in the Haram Sharif. Boko Haram in Nigeria, they kidnapped schoolgirls. They have killed over 2,000 people this year alone. Where did they get their inspiration from? Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, he killed a muazzin because he used to read salawat and salam upon the messenger before and after azan. Allah. This is well documented. In Taif, when the Wahhabis took over Taif, all of the people of Taif shut their doors. Because they were after aman, they were after safety. They were taking this from the example of our Prophet ﷺ, who when he entered into Mecca on the occasion of the Fateh Makkah, he said to the people, if you shut your doors, then I guarantee you security and we will not attack you. The people in Taif, when the Wahhabis attacked, they shut all their doors. What did the Wahhabis do? They knocked down the doors and they killed them. They gave no security whatsoever. So this brutal violence that we are seeing from Islamic State, where is its origin? The origin comes from Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab himself. Jihad, all of them talk about jihad, the centrality of jihad. Most of them, they are named after jihad. The full name of Boko Haram is what? Jama'atul Ahlus Sunnah lid-Da'wa wal Jihad. They see jihad as the central pillar of it. Where did they get that inspiration from? Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab himself, who said that fighting jihad against the Ottoman Sunni Muslims is permissible. And importantly, this is something that you have to pay very close attention to. All of them, all of these groups, they have always highlighted very important religious themes to appeal to you and I. They will use certain istilahat that you and I will never be able to deny. Have a look at that. Juhayman himself, what did he claim? What did Qahtani himself say? I am the Mahdi. Everyone knows who the Mahdi is. When someone says the Mahdi, you have to open your eyes to it. Even the timing of the attack in Mecca, that was quite deliberate. It was at the beginning, it was the 1st of Muharram at the turn of the new Islamic century. And they tried as much as possible to comply with the hadith literature on this. They did that deliberately. We know very well that Imam Mahdi will appear in the Haram Sharif. That's why they went to Haram Sharif there as well. Look at Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi right now. What is he saying and trying to claim? I am a Qurayshi. Why is he saying that? To justify his caliphate. He knows the hadith where it says, Al-A'immatu min Quraysh. That the Imams, they have to be from Quraysh. What are they doing? They're tricking you by using religious themes that you and I cannot deny. And they have been doing this ever since. The black flag is deliberate as well. Why are they using the black flag? Because they know that there is a hadith in Ibn Majah, recorded by Ibn Majah, when the Prophet ﷺ said that there will be black banners which will come from the east, and if you see them, you have to give allegiance to them, even if you have to crawl over ice to get to them. For he is the Mahdi. It's deliberate. They want to try to attract you through these kind of ploys as well, through these religious themes as well. Where did this theme start from? Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. He started this whole thing by putting Tawheed at the center. No one can deny Tawheed now, can they? When Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab talked about the primacy, importance of Tawheed, no one could turn around and say Tawheed not important. Everybody knew that was important as well. All of them, as you know very well, they are saying that we are returning to the Salaf. We are returning to the earlier times. But all of these groups, they are not returning back to the time of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They want to return to the time of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. For them, he is a Salaf. For them, life started in 1703 when he was born. The real Salaf is the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And as you know very well, all of them are destroying shrines. Again, who started this precedent? Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. This is a picture of Jannatul Baqi, 3 pictures there of what Jannatul Baqi looked like about 100 years ago.
SubhanAllah.
And you will see that there were shrines, that there were gumbads, in particular for Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And this was how it looked throughout the Islamic history. This is how it looks now. It's totally leveled. And again, whose sunnah is this? The sunnah started from Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab himself. In essence, all I am trying to say is simple. And I'll put it quite simply for you. Pak banda, pak awlad. Khabis banda, khabis awlad.
SubhanAllah.
And that is exactly what the situation with Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab is. Khabis, and unfortunately khabis awlad. And all of them, whether it's Juhayman, whether it's bin Baz, whether it's Osama bin Laden, whether it's Zawahiri, whether it's Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, they are all the children of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. And we have not seen the last of it. It will continue and continue. Americans, they are scratching their head and think that this is the worst possible thing. You've seen nothing yet. In 100 years' time, if you don't do anything about it now, we will turn around and we will say that, subhanallah, this Islamic State that existed in 2014, they were lightweight. They weren't very violent at all, because the situation is going to get worse and worse and worse. To conclude, guilt as a part of Iman. Very important. When a person commits a sin, then when you feel guilty about it, that's actually a sign of your Iman. If you have nadamat after, for example, stealing, you know that bad feeling that you have, that's actually a sign that you have faith. Why? Because the person feels that he has done something which contravenes, which goes against the teaching of his creator, who has the power to punish him. So when you commit a crime, when you do something wrong, if you feel guilty, rightly so, you should feel guilty. But at the same time, you should also know that this is a sign of your iman. The Islamic State right now, they are committing atrocities and they feel no guilt about it whatsoever. They are beheading people, they have no guilt whatsoever. People are reading the kalima, they are still killing them, they have no guilt whatsoever. If they have no guilt, it means they have no iman either. It's simple as that. We don't need to actually go into detail about how iman these people really are. It is quite obvious from that as well. Number two, has anything good come from Najd? Nothing has. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he did not perform a dua for Najd. There is good reasons behind that. Because this is where the fitna of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab actually came from. Number three, tackle the root, not the leaves. Right now, the Western forces, they are trying to think that, look, we will just send down bombs and we will destroy the Islamic State. That's like trying to destroy wheat by cutting off the leaves and leaving the roots. They'll be back after a week. If President Obama really wants to resolve this, then it's simple. He should pay the market price for oil. Telling the Americans that from now on, if you want us to get rid of terrorism, pay the market price for oil. Because right now they're getting it at bargain price because of their agreement with Saudi Arabia. And because they're getting it bargain price, that means they're turning a blind eye to all of the atrocities that are happening in Saudi Arabia. They're turning a blind eye to it. So if they want to get rid of terrorism, like everybody else, like Europe, like Africa, like Asia, just pay the market price for it. Pay for it through your pocket and inshallah everything will be okay as well. How can we stop Islamic State? Number one, we need to be more vocal. That unfortunately, we need to ensure that no one equates violence with Islam. And I'm sorry to say, we simply haven't done that. After 7/7, the government held countless anti-government extremist meetings up and down the country. Malik Saab knows about this. He was part of them as well. There were so many meetings happening even here in Leicester. How many of our Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah scholars attended that? None. Nobody did. Meetings in Whitehall and in London, how many of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah scholars went to those meetings? None. Hafiz is sitting here and he knows about this. Rather than sitting with our scholars, he had to sit with Wahhabis and Deobandis and talk about extremism in front of government ministers. He alone, what is he supposed to say? The Wahhabis and the Deobandis were saying, oh, we're against violence. Oh, we don't believe in this violence. Oh, we're against Osama bin Laden. They were the perpetrators in the first place, in reality. And what did they conveniently do? They found a scapegoat. And they said, look, Wahhabism is not the real cause of this. It's foreign policy like Israel and Palestine that's causing the problem. Not for one moment am I saying that Israel is not a problem. But it became a perfect scapegoat for the Wahhabi movement. Why is all of this extremism happening? Because of Israel. And ever since then, that is the problem. Even before Israel even existed, Wahhabis were killing Muslims and non-Muslims. Where was the foreign policy then? So we have to certainly be more vocal as much as possible. Unfortunately, what we are doing instead, we are fighting internally. Rather than actually tackling the external enemy, we are causing division and we are causing rifts as much as possible. And today, in this day and age, we should be standing up to that. In this country, we have jalse on Khatm Nabuwwat. We have jalse on Shane Awliya. We have conferences on Haqq Chariyat. We need to have conferences on anti-Wahhabism as well. It's been 6 months since this fitna has really kicked off. There has not been one single anti-Islamic State jalsa. Has there? Individual scholars have been doing a great job to try to put the message across. Qari Asam is one example. Sheikh Munawwar Atiq is another great example. But we need to have one platform where we actually talk about this publicly and actually hate them. Number two, if you hate Wahhabism, then hate their tactics as well. Hate them as much as possible. One thing that they do all of the time is takfir, calling another person a kafir. Unfortunately, within our ulama, this is starting happening now as well. That without basis, our own ulama are putting fatwa upon our fellow ulama. Where does this come from? And what is the purpose behind that? Stay away from this and have husn zan about the scholars that you actually love and actually cherish yourself. Look at your similarities, ignore your differences as much as possible. And finally, reclaim the Sunni banner. You are the Ahlus Sunnah. These Boko Haram, they call themselves Ahlus Sunnah. They call themselves Ahlus Sunnah. How insulting is that? I pick up the Sunday Times, I listen to BBC News, and they say the Sunnis in Iraq. I don't know what that means anymore. When I hear that word, I don't know who they mean by the Sunnis. We are the Sunnis. We should be making it clear that these people, they are the anti-Sunnis, they are the Salafi, they are the extremists. In terms of terminology, we have to put Sunnis back on our lips. For whichever reason we are using the term, and I'm saying this very sensitively, please don't put a fatwa on me later. We are using the term Barelvi too much now. I am Ala Hazrat until I die.
Subhanallah.
No one knows about Ala Hazrat's work more than myself and Hafiz in this room right now. I have translated his work, I have edited his work.
Subhanallah.
So I am Barelvi till I die.
Subhanallah.
But there is a lot of danger in calling yourself Barelvi all of the time if people don't understand what it means.
Nare takbir, Nare risalah.
In the mosque, by all means, within the Sunnis, talk about the fazilat of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, talk about the fazilat of Ala Hazrat. But outside the mosque, when someone asks you what is your maslak and what is your aqidah, you say, I am Barelvi, which means anti-Wahhabi, I am a Sunni. You have to make that clear. Because otherwise everybody else is hijacking this term. We are the rightful inheritors of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And if you look at Ala Hazrat himself, who was Ala Hazrat? Ala Hazrat was a reaction to Wahhabism. In reality, that's all he really was. So as much as possible through your work, through your sayings, and through your aqidah as well, reclaim the banner of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. I am sorry, I have totally gone over time. To finish, I will give you some further reading. If you want to know about the Saudi movement in detail much more, there's a brilliant book called by Stephen Short, Two Faces of Islam, available on Amazon. It tells the story of the relationship of the Americans and the British, and in particular the Saudi Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab as well. The story of Juhayman that I told, when he attacked Mecca. The full story is in this book here called The Meccan Rebellion. It's a very small book, again available on Amazon. It's quite an intriguing story, and you will see how Albani himself was actually involved in actually making this as well. Finally, you should have this book anyway in your library, in your home. By Jawal Haq. You must have Jawal Haq with you. That brilliant work written by Mufti Ahmad Yar Khan Naimi, because that basically is the anti-Wahhabi manifesto. It talks about everything that Islamic State is doing theologically today. It has been clearly indicated by Mufti Sahib in this book. It is available in English. There is absolutely no excuse whatsoever to ignore this. So please do read up on this as well. Jazakallah.
Subhanallah.